Well, here we are. Here's a new article from today's abc.net AU News, the Australian Broadcasting Commission. And it's an article written by Eliza Broderick, the Sex Discrimination Commissioner at the Equal Opportunity and Human Rights Commission, and Graeme Innes, who is the Disability Discrimination Commissioner there. And let's see what they've got to say. And you know from my previous videos that I believe that Elizabeth Broderick is a misandrist and sexist Sex Discrimination Commissioner. Anyway, between the two of them, they've knocked together an article. Graeme Innes and the Disability Discrimination Commissioner and Elizabeth Broderick, the Sex Discrimination Commissioner, they've knocked out an article called Protecting Women and Girls with Disability. Well, for a start, that's interesting. I mean, don't we protect men and boys with disability? That's a question well worth asking, especially when you consider that Elizabeth Broderick is always talking about differential and unfavourable treatment of women. But alas, as Sex Discrimination Commissioner, she does never seem too concerned with differential and unfavourable treatment of men and boys. I mean, what for men? I mean, men are supposed to go to a men's shed and get over it, I suppose. But anyway, recently there's a picture here too of a white ribbon, presumably on a woman's head. Anyway, it's a white ribbon celebrating the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. It's an opportunity for us to start ensuring women and girls with disability enjoy freedom from violence. Well, again, the question must be asked. Do men and boys not need, men and boys with disability, shouldn't they enjoy freedom from violence too? Anyway, you've got a picture of a white ribbon here. It was on Google the other day too. And it's all part of the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. As if violence against men doesn't occur. I won't read the whole article, but it's ostensibly about protecting women and girls with disability. I might just mention that I have seen blind, retarded, geriatric, epileptic, people with senile dementia, males. I have seen blind, geriatric, retarded people kicked and punched in the guts in New South Wales, Australian hospitals. So I'll just make that point. Now I'll just pick up a few of Broderick and Innes's points here. Now imagine she is in a care facility because she is a woman with a disability, a woman with an intellectual disability or a mental illness, a woman with a disability that severely limits her motor and speech abilities, or a woman with a disability that causes her to remain in bed. You can come up with other examples of women you may know. I don't doubt that women and girls with disabilities are discriminated against, but I also don't doubt that men and boys with disabilities are discriminated against either. Research, would that be feminist research? Research undertaken by the University of Western Sydney. The problem with feminist research is, like most research in the sociological sort of fields, you can always come up with the type of research you want and get the answers you want. It all depends on the suggestive setup of the experiment. The way an experiment or research is set up, you can get the results you want by asking leading questions, for example. I mean, we might think of Eva Cox, who said, Eva Cox, when she was head of the Australian Women's Electoral Lobby, she said, men shouldn't have a right to know the paternity, whether they're the father of a child or not, because research shows that it's better for everyone all round if the father doesn't know whether he is the child's parent or not. In other words, men are supposed to pay maintenance and alimony, all for the cause of feminism. You know, even if the child isn't their own, a cuckolded male is supposed to just fork out money for the good of all concerned, because feminist research says that's for the best of all concerned. But back to this subject. We're trying to complete a picture for you here, and it is a horrifying one. I've seen patients beaten. I don't doubt that this woman was subject to violence or raped or whatever. I've seen a blind geriatric person, retarded, epileptic, incontinent, couldn't walk, lying there on the floor in the nude, being kicked in the guts, covered in bruises. That's just one example. He was geriatric, he was retarded. I saw a man with senile dementia who was also blind. I saw him punched around, of course, covered in bruises, but I also saw him inverted in a big salon tea box. Inverted in a big salon tea box full of dirty laundry and left there, as if, according to Broderick, violence only happens to women and girls. I saw another man who couldn't walk. He wasn't blind, but he was covered in bruises and being kicked in the guts, kicked in the ribs, and I might make the point that one person who did all this became superintendent of nursing. That says a lot about things, doesn't it? I saw a retarded patient covered in little red bruises, and the doctor asked why, and it was because someone was punching him all over, a staff person. Now, I might make the point that I have never seen a female patient kicked in the guts. I haven't. I don't think the likelihood of a female patient being kicked in, I don't think it's very likely that a female patient would be dragged around, kicked in the guts, or turned upside down and dumped in a box. Complete a picture for you here, and it is a horrifying one. Too common in our community, discreetly swept under the carpet, as it has been for far, far too long. They're talking about violence against women and girls here. And they're talking also as if sexual violence doesn't happen to men who are disabled, men of disability, men and boys who are disabled. They're talking as if sexual violence doesn't happen to them. Recent research, again was it feminist research from the University of New South Wales, has found that Australian women and girls with disabilities are twice as likely as women and girls without disabilities to experience violence throughout their lives. Wouldn't that be the same, for God's sake, for whoever's sake? Wouldn't it be the same for men and boys who are disabled to be more likely to suffer discrimination? It's just common sense, isn't it? To put this in further perspective, women and girls with disabilities represent 1 in 5 of Australia's female population and not only experience violence at significantly higher rates, but more frequently, for longer, in more ways and by more perpetrators. All that can apply to a male too. As I've said, I have never seen a blind female patient kicked in the guts, but I have seen it done to blind men. I've seen them dragged around, bruised, kicked. Records showed 1,800 assault, sex attacks or rape allegations. State-appointed staff and carers were accused. Alleged violence has been wrongly described as incidents requiring internal management rather than being named and dealt with as alleged crimes. Yes, when I saw these male patients being beaten, I used to think that if those people doing that did that in the outside community, they would be sent to jail, probably for about 5 years, probably for a first offence or something, for bashing up a geriatric. I'm sure the judge would make an example of people who belted blind patients in the guts, who kicked blind patients lying on the floor, kicked them in the ribs, lying on the floor in the nude in the dormitory, kicked them in the guts and the ribs. I think a magistrate would put them away for a while. A shameful reality that Australian women and girls with disabilities experience high levels of domestic and family violence and sexual assault, and have high unmet needs in terms of access to domestic violence, sexual assault and related community services. Again, they're talking here as if violence against women and girls with disabilities is, they're talking as if it wouldn't happen to men and boys with disabilities. Domestic and family violence, all sorts of people, vulnerable people, disadvantaged people, get taken advantage of and abused. And as I said, we're not having a big international day for the elimination of violence against men, are we? We're not. Take the story of so-and-so. She gives an anecdotal story here of a woman with cerebral palsy, an intellectual disability, who has little speech and communicates using some blah blah. She goes on to say that this person was raped. Well, I mean, that's unfortunate, but sexual violence does happen to men too. When I was in this nursing situation, I would see a ring of, highly choreographed it would occur, a ring of nurses would tightly surround a male, an elderly geriatric male. This man couldn't walk except by leaning against the wall or holding a stick. They would form a tight ring around him, and he was obliged to hang his penis out, and he was obliged to agree with all the insulting questions that they put at him. And after it was all over, he was hit across the head, given a clip across the ear, as you'd call it, and let free. But I mean, of course, there was always talk of a big purple bell. As I said, one person, the person who was involved in that, became superintendent of nursing. But I mean, that's an example of a sexual violence carried out by a small gang, tightly choreographed, forming a ring around a patient, making him hang his penis out, and then humiliating him. Just for a moment, imagine yourself in that situation. What would you do? Yes, I used to think, what should I do? I asked doctors what I should do, and even doctors couldn't tell me what I should do. They didn't know what they would do in that situation either. In other cases, we heard of women in institutionalized care being effectively prostituted. This is an anecdote, but I have heard myself of retarded girls being given lollies for sex and so forth. I mean, that's exploitation. No one's arguing that exploitation of women doesn't occur. It may occur of males too. There's all sorts of exploitations and all sorts of tyrannies and violences. As I said, I didn't see too many women kicked or punched in the guts and covered in bruises. The overarching point here is that instead of being viewed as a critical priority for national action, here we have it again, like a mantra from Elizabeth Broderick, violence against women and girls with disabilities has remained largely outside public debate, social policy discussions, and service system reform processes. What about violence against men and boys, I asked. And it's worth keeping in mind, since she's talking about violence against women, it's worth keeping in mind that Elizabeth Broderick won't utter one word in defence of a little helpless baby infant boy's genital integrity. She won't even utter a word against the knife rape of a little boy. So that she's blind to their suffering, she's deaf to their screams, she's essentially a hypocrite, a misandrist, and she's sexist, isn't she? At the Australian Human Rights Commission, we are already involved with important initiatives like the Stop the Violence Project. Stop the Violence Project against whom? It wouldn't be women and girls, would it? And yes, violence against women and girls with disability. No mention of men and boys with disability. All sorts of vulnerable people can be exploited, including sexually exploited. Yes, she wouldn't even defend a baby boy from a knife rape, and that's the Sex Discrimination Commissioner. Today's International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women is the perfect opportunity for us all to lend our voices to these women and shine a floodlight on their often overlooked experiences, to start taking whatever steps we can to ensure that women and girls with disability can enjoy what, after all, is their fundamental human right of freedom from violence, exploitation and abuse, but of course no mention of the rights of men and boys there. And that was the article. Elizabeth Broderick is Australia's Sex Discrimination Commissioner, and Graeme Innes is Australia's Disability Discrimination Commissioner. Yes, I always make the point about Elizabeth Broderick that the position of Sex Discrimination Commissioner isn't some vehicle just to further the causes of feminism. The UK, what's it called in the UK? The Minister for Women and Equalities. But this in Australia is a Sex Discrimination Commissioner. It's not a Women's Commissioner. She is not Women's Commissioner. She is a Sex Discrimination Commissioner. She is supposed to look out for discrimination on grounds of gender, and that includes both genders. The tags for this article were domestic violence, disabilities, women's health, sexual offences. All these things, domestic violence can happen against males. I knew a boy who went to my school who was a battered husband, so domestic violence can happen to males, can't it? Males can be disabled. Males have health problems. I mean, men, if you look at the bigger picture of things, men have worse health problems than women do. Men's health is neglected. We have these women's health centres all over the place to cater to women's health. We don't have men's health centres to cater for men's health, do we? We don't. Sexual offences. A sexual offence can happen to a male, as I just pointed out with that man who was obliged to hang out his penis and be humiliated. A geriatric, senile person, incontinent, couldn't walk, was punched around too, was humiliated and, just degraded. Sex offences do occur against men too. I'm sure boys, in their youth and beauty, I'm sure in their youth and beauty, just as girls in their youth and beauty are exploited, I'm sure boys in their youth and beauty will be exploited too. And yes, sex offences occur against males, and not just let's be realistic. Male genital mutilation is a sex offence against a man. I've been genitally mutilated. Broderick won't speak up for male genital integrity. She'll speak up for female genital integrity. Male genital mutilation is a sexual offence, a knife rape of a baby boy, I've said, and occurs in Australian medical institutions. Yes, back to this Disability Discrimination Commissioner, Graeme Innes. I'd like to ask Graeme Innes, my genital mutilation has disabled my penis. It took away 75% of the most sensitive nervous tissue. It was cut out. I was deliberately sexually disabled, wasn't I? What do you think of that, Graeme? The deliberate disabling of male sexuality. My preputial sphincter is gone for life. It's handicapped and disabled on purpose. I'm sure if someone wanted to blind their child to some degree, you would say that was child abuse. If they wanted to deafen their child to some degree, you would say that to child abuse. Do that for smell and taste and touch. But it's okay to, apparently, to disable a penis. And are you going to stand there quietly as Disability Discrimination Commissioner? Are you going to stand there quietly and not say anything when boys are genitally mutilated, genitally disabled, basically, while your friend Commissioner Elizabeth Broderick won't ever utter a word in defence of a boy's genital integrity? Protecting women and girls with disability. It's never occurred to Broderick, apparently, that men and boys with disabilities need just as much protection, can be just as vulnerable, can be just as, much prey to, to somebody who is a sexual predator as a female. But she didn't do that sort of research. She didn't quote that sort of research. She wasn't looking for that sort of research. That wasn't the sort of thing that she wanted to find, was it? Anyway, I maintain that Elizabeth Broderick is a hypocrite. I maintain that she's sexist. I maintain that she's misandrist. And I maintain that feminism doesn't seem to have a conscience.